My dear brothers and sisters, we are in the midst of the Easter week. And the readings of today, both the first and the Gospel, speaks about the need to move on. We heard in the Gospel passage, just read to you, the disciples are still in disbelief. They cannot believe what they heard. They cannot believe even what they experienced. The Lord, after rising from the dead, had appeared to Mary Magdalene. She had conveyed the message to Peter, also to those going back home to Emmaus. And yet there's confusion in their minds. They just cannot believe because they are still in the so-called the Old Testament. And the disciples are huddled together for fear of what their fate would be. They're still afraid of the Roman authorities. They are thinking in their mind, what happened to our Lord and Master may also happen to them. And so the reading tells them the need to move on. So when Christ appears to them and they huddle together, the first verse that it speaks is, peace be to you. To move on in life, we need peace in our minds and our hearts. If you're huddled, if you are in a muck, we need to remove ourselves from the muck. If we are surrounded by difficulties and all troubles us, we cannot move on in life because these things in a way choke us. That's what happened to disciples. They were choked. They couldn't just imagine what is happening to them and around them. So the Lord in a way explains to them about His so-called the past, that the Messiah, the Christ, had to suffer because God's will. And then He had to move on. So He asked them to move on and to be His witnesses. And we had to see, we heard in the first reading of Gospel today is that Peter, apostles already moved on because they had experienced the risen Lord. They move on in life. Life is like that. You always have to move on. If you see around us, the river Mandu, the water is always flowing. Either flowing in the sea, outside the sea. It's always flowing. I know of people who, to move on in life, they have to make sacrifices. I remember so many people whom I knew, they didn't have peace within themselves because their work structure was such, they said, I can't work in this place. I have to resign and move on because so much so-called of injustice, so much of corruption. I need to give up this work and move on. And they have done that. We always are on the move. To move, we need peace, or we call shalom, which means wholeness of mind and heart. We ask the Lord and Master today, let us move on to give us that peace within ourselves so that lives become much more pleasant. We need to believe that as we move on, the Lord is always accompanying us.